People with disabled kids, what's the most unconventional way you've learned to connect with them? After my wife passed away, my daughter Sophie completely withdrew. She was always quiet because of her autism, but after Marie died, it felt like Sophie disappeared into herself completely. She stopped making eye contact. She stopped talking. She started pacing the same 5 steps back and forth through the living room. I couldn't reach her. No matter what I tried, she wouldn't respond. Grief was already a heavy thing, but watching your child vanish behind it is something else. One night, I was baking cookies. I hadn't baked anything since Marie died. It used to be her thing. She'd do it every Friday, and Sophie would sit nearby. That night, I pulled out the old mechanical kitchen timer we'd had since our wedding. I wound it to 12 minutes and set it down. The ticking filled the silence. Sophie wandered into the kitchen while I was wiping the counter. She sat at the table and just watched the timer. Then out of nowhere she said, "Are they chocolate chip?" I froze. She hadn't spoken to me in weeks. I said yeah, and she nodded. Then she told me how her teacher wore funny socks that day. I didn't say a word for a full minute because I was scared if I moved, it would end. But for those 12 minutes, she talked about school, her favorite episode of a cartoon she liked, and about how she missed mommy's singing. Then the timer went off. The cookies were done, and Sophie got up without saying another word and walked away, like nothing happened. I tried it again the next night, set the timer, baked something. 12 minutes of her sitting and talking like before. As soon as the bell rang, she left the room. It became our thing. Every night, I'd set the timer. Sometimes we baked cookies, sometimes muffins or banana bread. It didn't matter. The sound of that old timer meant something to her, and for those 12 minutes, she came back to me. My mom moved in with us about 3 months after Marie passed. Her name is Margaret. She's very practical, type of woman who labels her spice rack and folds fitted sheets like it's an Olympic sport. She meant well. She saw how exhausted I was and wanted to help. She cleaned, cooked, rearranged the living room, and eventually turned her attention to the kitchen. She took one look at that old timer and said, "This thing is barely holding together. You need one that actually works." I told her no. I didn't tell her why. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. She dropped it, or so I thought. One night I forgot to wind the timer. Just forgot. And Sophie broke down, screaming, crying, banging her fists on the floor. It was like watching her world collapse. My mom saw it and said, "This isn't healthy. She shouldn't depend on a kitchen gadget to function." The next day while I was at work, she replaced it with a sleek digital timer that talked and glowed blue. I came home and found it on the counter. The old one was gone. I panicked. That night, Sophie refused to go into the kitchen, wouldn't even look at the new timer. She stopped speaking again, shut down completely. I confronted my mom, told her the timer wasn't just some outdated thing. It mattered. She called it a crutch, said Sophie needed to adapt. I snapped, told her she didn't understand, that I was scared I'd never get my daughter back, that every minute of those 12 meant more to me than any conversation I'd had in months. Sophie overheard us arguing and ran to her room, slamming the door. She didn't come out for hours. I felt like I had broken something I couldn't fix. I tore the house apart looking for that timer, couldn't find it anywhere. Finally, my mom admitted she threw it away but had kept the broken pieces, thinking I might want them for memory's sake. I found a small repair shop tucked into the corner of a strip mall. The guy behind the counter was old and soft-spoken, said he'd seen hundreds of those timers. I showed him the broken pieces and explained everything. He looked at me for a long time and then said, "You're lucky. I've got the exact same model in my collection. Been sitting on my shelf for 20 years. I offered to pay him more than it was worth." He shook his head and said, "My grandson's autistic too. Routine is everything. You keep it." When I got home, Sophie was curled up on the couch. I wound the timer and placed it on the table. She looked at it, eyes wide, and said, "That's mommy's timer." I nodded and started the countdown. Sophie sat at the table, said she saw a red bird on the way home, said she thought the new girl in her class had weird shoes. 12 minutes later, the timer dinged. She looked at me and said, "Can we do muffins tomorrow?" My mom stood in the doorway. She watched the whole thing. Later, she sat down with Sophie and asked, "Can you tell me what makes the timer special?" Sophie said, "It sounds like mommy baking. It makes me feel like I'm not alone." My mom cried. First time I'd seen her cry in years. We've used that timer every night since. Not just for cookies anymore. Sometimes just to sit and talk, but always 12 minutes.